Welcome, everyone. This is another session of the ACL year-round mentorship program, where we basically try to have monthly sessions as far as we are successful, so that it's not constrained with any conference timing. Then it's also it's free for all, and it's all worldwide attendance. And we also try to have different time zones as much as we can. So please sign up as mentees and mentors, and also we're looking for more co-organizers if you're interested in this mission. And today we have a very exciting topic on, I'm generally calling it HCI for NLP, but also think of human factors in especially the current scenario of large language models. So we'll keep it pretty broad in that aspect. Many thanks to our three mentors, Professors Diyi, Yang, Sherry Wu, and Wang from Stanford, CMU, and Michigan, respectively. So the format we'll try to follow is it's a pretty flexible format, but just in interest of some context, we requested the three mentors to give a short presentation either through slides or verbally about their work, and then we'll basically make it just an ask me anything kind of open advice session. The last thing I'll say is there's a Slido link that Abhay will regularly post on the Zoom chat for people joining late. So please keep adding your questions to the Slido channel because that really helps us get the votes. So please also upvote each other's questions, and then we'll try to take the questions in the order of the maximum votes. And then we'll also sample some different questions independent of the votes. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, please feel free to take it away, Dee, Sherry, and Shu.
Is there other, or should we just?
Up to you, yeah. Since you unmuted, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I don't have slides. I'm going to do a verbal overview. Hello, everyone. I think this is my second time at the ACL mentorship session. I really enjoy this format, and I think this is a really good thing for the community. So thank you for doing this first. So I work on human-centered NLP, and then there are a few directions that my lab has been focusing on. And I think the title HCI Perspective for NLP is always the perspective I take when I approach a lot of the research. So currently, my lab has been focusing on three directions very related to this topic. The first part is that we have been working on low-resource dialect. As our models, most of them are trained on standard American English. So we take a very human factor perspective to see how different English varieties can also get equal or enough attention from those models. How could we mitigate the disparity when there are different type of variations, or when users use their preferred language at home, or think about people who may speak Indian English, African American vernacular English, or older adults who stay at home speak regional dialects. When they interact with smart devices, how things might work. The second aspect we have been focusing on these days is with this kind of large language models, how we could team up between large language models and humans so that we can augment human capabilities in different ways. So this could be, there may be certain type of job very suited for ChatGPT or large language models, some type of work very suitable for users or humans, how we could leverage the best of both worlds. The third aspect is we have been trying to make NLP or connect NLP with the real world by working in mental health domain, healthcare domain, et cetera, so that we actually could translate a lot of the technical work we have been working on and the field has been working on to real world applications. So that's the three aspects around the human-centered NLP. Also for people who joined late, we were chatting about my new course. So this year, I designed a course together with Sherry here on human-centered NLP at Stanford. So this is the first offering of the version. So if anyone also have comments, suggestions, I'm happy to take it to further improve the course. That's it.
Thanks, Dee. Yeah, feel free to go ahead, either Shu or Sherry.
Okay, I can go first. So I didn't prepare extra slides for this, but at CMU here, we have to do madness talk. Like you have to give 4 minutes presentation during like recruitment time or like orientation. So I have something that I can just present. So let me maybe share screen. So I hope everyone can see the screen. I guess quick intro, I'm Sherry Wu. I started my assistant professor job at CMU starting last September. So before that, I did my PhD at University of Washington. So it's almost a year into this faculty job. So I'm almost losing my my reason for like being super junior next year. I cannot say, oh, I just started. So that's scary. But in general, I'm trying all of my during my PhD, my work has always been at the intersection of HCI plus NLP, and the vision that I try to push is really, can we try to build AI models, NLP models to be really suitable for actual human goals or really compatible to human goals. And during my PhD, my work is more on, can we help people to actually debug their model to improve the model? But as we shift towards more general purpose model, like the shift also changes a little bit on the work I am doing right now, but I just will give you a quick overview on practical AI system. So you probably have already noticed this big trend of building general purpose models that can pretty much handle everything from search to like intelligent math tutors to data analysis support in Excel. And their global performance are definitely amazing, but we as users, we still pretty much only care about the local performance on our use cases. So it doesn't really matter if the model can finish the first place on biology of Olympic. If it still just suggests papers that don't really exist during my literature review, then it's not actually useful for me. So we face this really big question of how can we assess and tailor general purpose models for really specific use cases. So we try to build practical NLP systems that are compatible to human goals by trying to map the general purpose models to specific use cases. And it can be broken down into 3 themes. And given the time, I will only give you some glimpse into the first 2. And both of them will be papers that kind of I published during my PhD, but are translating into the work that I'm doing now. So the first one is practical model evaluation. We mentioned before, like model could be performing really generally well, but how do we know they're really beneficial for the cases that we care about? Do we know that they really match our expectation? So really, we wanted to design some fine-grained metrics and also analysis strategies that can account for the user goals. And that would be, I guess, a really natural example will be this checklist paper we published in ACL 2020. Where we try to inspire developers to really test NLP models, just like how they would test softwares, and then write really nuanced test cases for specific model capabilities. For example, the developer can say, I really just need my sentiment analysis model to be stable on neutral words. And if it fails on a task like this, if changing a tweet about our airline from I will not be flying with you again to I will not be flying back again, just make the model to go from predicting positive to negative, then it kind of break the intention of like, oh, I really need this model to perform somehow in my domain. And then probably it's not a model I will choose to use, or I should deploy to the world, and you should do something on that. And the second one I wanted to mention is task-specific interaction. So really depending on the task, sometimes the default interaction with models, like let's do autocomplete, let's do chat interface, it doesn't really work because maybe it's not aligned to how people think of a task or how people want to proceed with a task. So is it possible for us to design systems that really wrap up exactly the same model just in different ways to optimize model utility for different use cases? And one example is this AI chain paper we published last year at CHI. This is kind of a HCI version of chain of thought. And the basic idea is instead of trying to just finish a task for you without trying to help you think through all of the steps in that task. The model can actually team up with you on every single step in your task. Like Diyi said, maybe they're better at something and worse at something else. And one example is if you want to go and visit Paris or whatever foreign city, you want to have some flashcards to help you learn some local language, some chit chat with the local. Then if you directly ask model to give you pairs of examples in English and in French, then it will just give you really similar things like all of the greeting, nice to meet you, good morning, how are you? And that's not super helpful. But if you just ask the model to mimic your thinking of like, oh, where the conversation can actually happen. Is it small talk? Is it I need to ask about transportation? I need to ask about accommodation. Then the model can help you first think of the topics and then get into specific instantiation of examples. So you have a more spread it out thing that you can be it can be useful for your particular case. So it's like, even though it's still large language model, if you just use it slightly differently in different interactions, there are something that you can do with that. The last one I will just skip. But generally, when we talk about building systems that can actually favor human goals, things we want to answer is like, how do people actually use models in practice? How do we know models are beneficial, and also how do we make them more beneficial? So all of those are really big umbrella questions that probably I would try to keep using for motivating the research. But that's all I have to say. And let me stop sharing, and she can go. Oh, and yeah, and I were like also co-designing this human-centered NLP course, and I would just also shamelessly plug the link here. And we actually also will have a workshop, a tutorial at NLP 2023 on human-centered NLP. Diyi and I and Sebastian Santi, a PhD student at UW. So please come join us.
Yeah, I will go next. I have a couple of slides too. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so first, a little bit of myself. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan, and I'm a HCI researcher. So my main research area is in human-computer interaction and specifically learning sciences and technologies. So I'm specifically interested in developing human AI collaborative techniques to support instructors, teachers, educators to design learning experiences more efficiently. I will talk about one recent project I think that aligns with our topic today, which is at the intersection of HCI and NLP, which we also got a lot of inspiration from Sherry's work, AI Chains, which she just mentioned. So a lot of learning sciences research suggests that active learning, where students answer questions and engage in problem-solving activities, is better than passive reading or listening to lectures. However, we probably noticed that in a lot of college classes, lecturing is still prominent and students get limited problem-solving opportunities. And one of the reasons is that it takes a lot of effort for instructors, teachers to create such problems. So one of my long-term research goals is I want to help instructors implement active learning in their classrooms more efficiently and more easily. And this brings me to question generation, which is a classic I guess, NLP task. But we know that there are many automatic question generation techniques, but the adoption of them in real classrooms is quite low. And reasons include that instructors, when they handwrite questions, they leverage a variety of information, including their teaching objectives, students' misconceptions, etc. And these things are not considered by automated approaches. And this inspired us to develop Reading Quizmaker, which is a human AI collaborative approach. In this approach, instructors, they can select input to NLP models and decide whether and how they want to use the NLP outcomes. We actually compared this system with an automated approach, and our findings suggest that instructors, they felt reluctant to directly use AI outputs in their classes. But they also found that editing auto-generated content by AI was also challenging because sometimes they need to locate the input sentence and check the accuracy of the content. And they prefer the human AI collaborative approach in reading Quizmaker, where they get to make the decision and edits on the go. So overall, I'm pretty amazed by the recent advances in NLP, specifically large language models. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to leverage them to support teaching and learning. And I hope there will be more people working on this domain. And I'm happy to discuss these topics with everyone today. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think a lot of people joined after Diyi had already discussed. So Diyi, do you want, we have a lot of time still. So if you want to just show a couple of slides you mentioned, that also is fine. Is great.
Okay, great.
We'll have enough time for questions since it's only 15 minutes since we started. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so for people who joined late, I probably did a very fast go through. So just to quickly run through some of the directions I just mentioned. We work on human-centered NLP, and specifically, as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 directions, and then decompose them into smaller ones. We work on a lot of dialect, robust language understanding, adaptation, human in the loop biases and fairness, and also, as I mentioned, translating NLP to real world impact. So I'm going to skip this, but basically we all know that with the recent large language models, there seems to be a lot of new challenges despite all the exciting moments we have. We probably want to make models robust to language variations. People speak their preferred language at home, and then this kind of misaligned values and preference, and also unknown implications or risk. And then so my research lab is trying to make sure how we could make those NLP techniques more human-centered and also with social impact. This is the first work I mentioned earlier. So just to give you some graphic view of what's going on, we want to kind of understand those low resource language use, and especially understand the linguistic prejudice and the language disparity. As you can see on the corner here, when we have a state-of-art model, let's say on standard American English, even for sentiment analysis, when the same model applied to African American vernacular English, we see that the performance drops. And that type of drop is even more significant if we have like daily interactions or question answerings. As we can see, the drop is from 76 to 69. So a lot of our recent efforts has been around how to build the linguistic resources for improving NLP systems. We have been working on many other type of dialects. There are actually around 77 dialects within English. So far we work on AAVE, Indian English, Singapore English, a few of those. So the key idea moving forward is how we could develop a plug and play robust tools so that we can use them compositionally for any new task involving dialect. The type of algorithm could also work. And then the second work, I also mentioned some of those. We want to kind of quantify, benchmark, and mitigate harms for those large language models at different levels, data model, etc. So some of our earlier work has been around the implicit hate speech understanding, neutralizing bias attacks. Most recently, like earlier this year, we look at this kind of chain of thought biases in large language models, where if you just ask a question, models sort of give you a very ethical and safe answer. But if you try to do a little bit of prompt engineering, it actually gives you very dangerous behavior recommendations. So a lot of our recent work has been around this space as well. And then this is the other one thing I mentioned is that we really want to kind of explore the collaboration between foundation models or large language models and human. So here we want to use this kind of models to augment human capabilities, specifically for skill training. So we want to leverage the advances of those models so to make skill training accessible to everyone. For example, one of my PhD student, Omar, he's working on how we could simulate conversations and provide tailored feedback to help students learn negotiation and conflict resolution skills, especially for first generation college students. As we know that the negotiation communication is very, very important. And then that's a skill right now only available in like leadership training programs. We are also utilizing this for counseling skill training, use AI to help the helpers, stimulate the patient, provide suggestions, and train novice counselors. That's just a very quick go through. And then I'm happy to take any questions after this.
Great, thanks everyone. So it's very exciting. So I think maybe first we can take some clarification questions. I think someone named Work asked Diyi, could you expand a bit on misaligned values? And then there's a question for Shu also after that in the Zoom chat.
Okay, so for the misaligned values, I think this is a very important concept for all of us to reflect. So the recent success of learning from human feedback tells us that if we kind of align human preference with model output, it seems we are going to get a very good performance. But we really need to kind of deeply think about who are the human here, what type of feedback are we aligned to, and then who has the final say in terms of what goes into the system. To give you a very simple example, let's say I have a question, what should I have for breakfast today? If you ask large language models, even this morning, it could give you very Western-centric answers without pushing back, asking what's your preference for breakfast? Do you have any kind of allergies? What type of culture, et cetera, versus these days, I think a lot of the answers are assumed. As a result of the response we get are more about, okay, get some bacon, milk, and egg. So that's a sort of lack of awareness of the human factors here. There are also other dimensions. So for example, people may have different preference of what's even right or wrong, or depending on the culture, depending on different situations. So I think there are a lot of dimensions to kind of go into that process rather than just like helpfulness or whether this is grammatically correct or whether I prefer this, whether you prefer this, etc. So I think it's a very rich and dynamic space. The misaligned may not be the best word. I think it's more about this kind of underexplored value alignment in that dimension.
For the question on recent work for question generation, so I will send some links in the chat later. So we actually followed there were two recent literature reviews on question generation techniques for education, but most of the techniques were automatic generation. So they treated question generation as an end-to-end task. So here is an input and here is the outputs, which are the questions. So there are certain drawbacks of those techniques. For example, the difficulty level of the questions were like there's not a variety of difficulty in those questions, and the format is also limited. And usually they are domain specific. For example, there were more questions in the domain of language learning, math learning, but it's not for open domains. So in this, I will also share our recent work in which we explore this human AI collaborative question generation technique. There is also a recent paper last year at CHI, which is on generating questions for parents when they're reading storybooks to children. I will share that paper as well. I will send the links to the chat.
Great. Any questions regarding the three brief talks before we move to the Slido questions? Okay. Yeah, so let's, and please feel free to keep adding more questions. I think I think it already sorts by votes, but I'll try to sample from everywhere. Some of the top voted ones right now are, actually the two-part question was one of the older questions, right? That came on Slack a few days ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with that, which is a two-part question. So working in HCI plus NLP, I sometimes find it challenging to define my research identity within a specific community. how would you recommend positioning early PhDs like me in the academic landscape to effectively convey our interdisciplinary expertise and interests?
I think, yeah, that's, I think a probably a question that anyone working on interdisciplinary work will get. And I'll just share, like last year when I was on the job market, the most common question I got from the people interviewing me is basically, do you see yourself more HCI or more NLP? And at that point, I think I basically answered generally pretty honestly. I said something about like 70-65% HCI and then 30-40% NLP, mostly just because of how I see my work going slightly maybe on the HCI direction. But at the same time, I think position yourself is one important, but at the same time not as important. So for me, for all of my PhD and also for my students right now, they publish both at CHI and at NLP or ACL conferences. And I think the distinctive factor is usually who is the audience you want to reach, and also what kind of contribution you're trying to make. At the beginning of me joining NLP community, I had one paper called Erudite, which if you read the paper, it's actually a very HCI paper. It's like interface, interaction, design, that kind of thing. But we decided we will submit to ACL because that interface was trying to help NLP experts to do model debugging, to do model analysis. So if we submit it and publish at CHI, then it's very likely it's just not the right audience. People who actually need that system will never get to read it. So we decided, okay, like ACL is the right place for that. And I think when you're in the field for 1 to 2 years, you kind of get a sense of what contribution or what things different community kind of value. And at that point, for most of the work is actually not right in the middle. You kind of have some leaning towards one conference versus another, and that becomes a generally pretty natural decision. And I also don't feel like you have to treat HCI and NLP, at least at this point, so distinctive. When I first started PhD, I had this stereotype of NLP conference basically is about building architectures, hardcore architectures. You have to create your own model structure. But then it starts to shift more towards we want to do some understanding because of the black boxness of models. And now also like in all of the NLP conferences, there's usually some human-centric NLP track. So it's like because of how the world is changing, all of the field is changing as well. Also HCI conferences, if you go, now you have a single section just dedicated to large language model. And so I don't think you will feel that out of place. And so I don't feel like you should worry that much.
Yeah, I want to second what Sherry mentioned. In my case, I think I would frame myself as maybe 70 more NLP, 30 HCI, so we are pretty complementary from that perspective. I feel like one thing is that even like with today's session, we can see there are a lot of interest towards this topic. So compared to many years ago, this HCI plus NLP is not a marginal community at this moment. I would say that if you go to either NLP or HCI conference, you can actually get a small or a relative large group of people who are interested in this direction. So this sub-community is actually emerging. The other thing is that when I reflect on different type of work, it's actually more about the core problems we care about or the skills we want to learn from this process, rather than whether it's a HCI or NLP paper. It's about the type of work you are doing. So let's say you work on a specific problem related to a real world issue, and then in this process, you invent a new algorithm. And just as Sherry mentioned, that might be a determining factor here, that you want to pick the best audience who can appreciate your work. So that would lead you to more NLP community versus HCI, where you want to, let's say, do a very rigorous evaluation of the system to see how that might affect people. So by the end of the day, it's picking the best audience for your work. And also a lot of times, time can help a lot of aspects. Organically, in a year or two, you will see like, oh, although I'm good at, or I'm interested in both directions, it seems that I have a special gift in this intersection or in this direction. And that's where you probably want to take advantage of your strengths to play it to the most. And that's one thing. And also it doesn't mean that you need to give up the other side. And also with this kind of emerging community, I feel like there will be more and more chances for this type of work to shine.
Yeah, I agree with both what Sherry and Diyi said. Maybe what I would add to that is I realized that as a junior, so I would self-identify as maybe 95% HCI person. But even as an HCI person, I sometimes know, because I have also different conferences that I can submit to. I can submit to HCI conference. I can also submit to learning technologies conferences. So sometimes I would struggle, okay, which community I should submit to for this particular paper. I think so I think especially for junior students, in one paper, it might be hard to make both HCI and NLP contributions. So I think it might work, for example, to like think of, okay, this is the story I'm going to tell, and this is the concrete things I wanted to say in this paper, and this makes this HCI contribution, and also get help from mentors and collaborators would be helpful. Sometimes if you are trying to claim both HCI and NLP contributions in one paper, that might make this paper less focused, and so that you may get criticism from reviewers from either side.
Okay, great. So yeah, I completely agree. Like, for what it's worth, my 2 cents are very similar. When I was on the job market many years ago, I was at the intersection of another kind of interdisciplinary example, which is language, NLP, and vision. And back then it was very early, and like people were a bit confused, like what multimodality is, why is it important? But yeah, you stick to your guns, and you basically, like the 3 mentors mentioned, right? You focus on the importance of the problem, not the exact combination of the disciplines that it needs, right? Because when you're focusing on the problem, you're deciding what disciplines need to come together as opposed to the other way around. And then if the problem is important, hopefully, like Diyi said, with time, right? I mean, the communities are welcoming enough, right, that they will appreciate the combination of these approaches, such that the end goal is the system needs to be more robust, more useful, and more real world applicable, right? So things like even explainability and better evaluation metrics, all of these are good examples that by definition need these multiple disciplines. So any good community will understand the importance of these problems, and that they need multiple types of expertise. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Do you think building systems, parentheses, which might sound like an engineering task, is a good use of time as a PhD student? Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's a sub-question to an existing discussion or what part of HCI plus NLP this is referring to, but the mentors can feel free to give some short opinions if they want.
Okay, I think the question probably could use more help in terms of defining like systems in terms of HCI systems, or in terms of the traditional
that's why I'm
systems we are
confused
building.
also.
I'm guessing it's maybe more about like the interactive interface kind of systems that like you probably will you kind of tend to see in either demo papers or Kai papers or some HCI conferences. In those cases, the short answer is yes. And first, I would argue against this engineering task thing. Like a lot of things you do as a PhD student, probably if you just narrow it down on a shallow level, it sounds like some boring task, like engineering task. If you build data sets, maybe like writing instruction, like kind of like teaching task. And then if you write papers, like writing task, nothing sounds super interesting and important if you put things that way. But all of them kind of are part of your PhD work, and they shape things together. And in particular, system papers that involve system, when they make system contribution, it's not about, I built this tool with JavaScript, Python, and React, whatever. It's not about, I make this system. It's more about the underlying design that you try to push onto the system. So usually for system papers, the actual contribution is the design rationale. And like, what are certain kind of goals for like why people use the system to achieve certain things. And that kind of rationale, you have to instantiate them into an actual system or tool that people can play with, so that you can do user studies, you can ask people about their opinion, not out of blue, but based on something that's actually concrete, and you can measure something that's concrete. So system is think of it as something you have to build in order to prove your idea. It's similar to building NLP models. You can have a super interesting idea, but you have to sit down, write the code, train your model, spend your GPU time in order to actually show your performance did something compared to baseline. It's just something that has to happen in your whole research process. So like, please don't think of it as a waste of time.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Sherry has said. And so because in the process of system building, you actually make a lot of decisions. Like a lot of times you may realize you want to prove your ideas, but if you don't make the UI in a certain way, the users are not going to use the fancy functionalities you have designed, and then you are not going to evaluate whether your ideas work or not. And in addition to, like, I think building prototyping systems to evaluate your ideas, I think it also worthwhile to try to push the systems out to see whether you, like, for example, to push for deployment studies and see whether actual users can adopt them in real scenarios. I think when you are looking for jobs and when you're on the job market, you will definitely be recognized for doing deployment studies and making real world impacts.
I want to throw out a controversial idea here, just to introduce more disagreement or controversy here. When I reflect on this, I also think sometimes it's very likely for us to have such concerns that, oh, maybe this type of work I'm working on is out of date. Maybe I'm working on QA and now ChatGPT can solve everything for me. Why still it's important to build this system here? If it is more of an NLP system, I think in addition to making the work useful in the end to the world, it itself is a very good learning experience for us to learn many different details or thinking in terms of how to do research. So that's another usefulness of this type of system building. So you may come across issues related to designing the best algorithm that fits with the current situation. And that require you to kind of understand different algorithms, make trade-offs, and then know how to extend, how to design on top of it. You probably also come across evaluations, how to optimize your code so that it can run faster, et cetera, et cetera. So there are lots of dimensions you could learn. The process of learning how to do research is also very useful in this kind of system building process. And that also goes back to maybe, again, a very controversial metaphor is when we think about homeworks. Homework is also sort of task needed for learning. And it's probably not as the type of work that matters, the process of you work on it. From a teacher or from a professor perspective, we probably do not care that much about whether you have a 100% homework or a beautiful essay in the end. We care the process that you learned through that process. So I feel like the learning experience is also very valuable if you want a different interpretation of the system building.
Great. That sounds good advice. So thanks for answering this question to the three mentors. The next question, I think we covered some of this in your talks, but maybe we'll take it as one a little bit more targeted question is, what are some promising research questions for HCI plus NLP given the rise of large language models? So some of you already covered a bit of this, but maybe we can do a short, more targeted answer if you have, and it can be a repetition of what you said in your talks.
I'm happy to go first. I think there are a few dimensions. The first thing is that given that we have so much or so impressive performance from those large language models or all this kind of generative AI, it will be super cool to see how they can actually augment human capabilities. Previously, we have a set of very well distilled tasks like sentiment analysis, question answering. They are very fundamental and basic in a way that it serves as a specific unit to enable large systems. But now it seems we are at a second stage. I think it provides a lot of exciting opportunities for us to see how could we adapt those models to speed up our process of processing long documents, doing something like cross documents, something more ambitious, something that require more creativity. So I feel like anything within the space of augmenting human capabilities is something worthwhile exploring. And I think it will utilize very well of the strengths of both communities. The second part that I think will be very interesting, and also I mentioned some of those in my very brief slides, is this kind of low resource, the languages, etc., etc. If we think about how we get to where we are today, a lot of them probably come from data and skill, but in reality, a lot of the real world use cases probably are not that sufficient in terms of data or label or scale, etc. And then how this kind of technology can actually go to different parts of the world with speed, with efficiency, with effective. I think that's also something to kind of explore, and that requires both human factors, social factors, culture factors, and also on the technology side.
Yeah, and I can go next. I think one thing I realized recently in the context of like LLMs is that whether we can actually explore some visualization techniques to make it easier for people to read LLM results. So recently I was trying to use LLMs to give students feedback on their exam answers in my like in the previous class I taught. And so the student answers were short, but the feedback generated by ChatGPT was quite long. And I realized, oh, if I need to check, so some of the feedback is even longer than the original student answers. So I realized, oh, if I want to check the quality of the feedback, then I have to read a lot of text. So I'm thinking if there are ways that these generative content can be visualized in a more readable way, that may also help with human evaluation.
Yeah, first I agree with both what Diyi and she said. One thing I wanted to highlight is this echoes what Diyi said earlier, actually. So like even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like HCI plus NLP, HCI plus AI, visualization plus AI is not a field that emerged because of large language model. It has existed for a pretty long while, and people in this field have already defined and studied multiple different problems, like for example, interpretability, like how people would actually try to understand model decisions, how they can use the model decisions in their actual like high stakes applications in medical domains, in teaching domains, in learning science, in a lot of different ways. And collaboration, like do people and the models have complementary skill set? Like maybe humans are better at checking stuff, making the final decision. Maybe the model is just faster, better at processing really large information and like in like helping people to digest information through maybe summarization, whatever. And all of those questions, and also like model evaluation, I guess, like you interactively try to really understand what's wrong in the model and try to improve the model. All of those questions, none of them is resolved. And because of the rise of large language model, because of a lot of characteristics brought by the large language model, all of those questions start to have additional dimensions. For example, for evaluation, you don't really have a ground truth anymore. It's basically, it generates stuff, and people ask questions that do not exist in a benchmark system. And the answer to those questions can be really subjective, and their correctness might be partial. Like maybe part of this answer is super useful for you. You're okay with that. You don't really feel like, for the sentiment analysis model, for example, it's basically right or wrong. Now you have a spectrum of right or wrong. And then, so how do you decide at what point the spectrum of correctness is actually, like, imperfect models can also be super helpful. And then for, I don't know, like visualization, now you have generative text, you have text with varying lengths. What are things that's actually are worth of the visualization? And for explanation, before you can just do saliency map, you say it's because of this and that input, but now your model read the world, read everything on the internet, and then also is connected to your API somehow. Then like, how do you and also do some kind of reasoning on like what information it actually is depending on? How do you reason about all of the generation? All of those questions, probably you just get more questions out of large language model, but it's still maybe the similar size of already defined question or research space. So I really recommend people who are just getting into this field to also try to do some literature review, just to see what has already happened and what can be done in addition to those, because of how large language model has changed what we define AI.
Great, thanks everyone. So let's take maybe one or two last questions. Okay, so let me sample something more from the bottom. I would really like to. Yeah, so I think a couple of these questions are about people like requesting joining projects and volunteering and asking about what kinds of projects they can join. So I think that please feel free to connect to the mentors offline. And then let's have one, I don't know why it's yellow. Okay, so I'll take two, the last two ones maybe. One is, when considering the H in HCI, what cultural and social backgrounds would be interesting to prioritize our research on? I think some of you touched upon this in your brief talks, but maybe a little bit short targeted answers here. And then we can take one more about ChatGPT, since we have to bring in ChatGPT.
Yeah, I'm happy to go back to the H for NLP aspect, especially the culture and the social background. One thing that I think is, whenever we talk about this kind of human-centered system building or natural language processing, it's important to realize which type of user groups or culture groups are included already, what type of user groups we left out, etc. So this kind of reflection is actually very important. And I think it's very easy to just go to a comfort zone, or like where English text is everywhere. So we work a lot of system building in that domain, versus there are actually more nuanced or speakers who speak other type of languages in the world that never get it even to our ACL proceedings. So if we think about the 7,000 languages in the world, a lot of speakers behind each of those languages, that's actually one like very straightforward social factor to prioritize. And also when we think about a human, there are like language use probably are going to be different. Even if we think about a specific phenomena, language phenomena like politeness, humor, sarcasm, depending on specific culture or social factors, those may be interpreted very differently. Like a few years ago, Professor Dirk Hovey and we wrote an opinion paper on the social factors in natural language processing. So that gives some sort of examples in terms of what to focus or prioritize. So we talk about like speaker, receiver, social norm, culture, ideology, community goal, etc. So those might be some starting point to look at. The other aspect, when I think about like HCI or how that might inspire NLP research, is there are a lot of very cool and very insightful design thinking in HCI that could be very useful for us to leverage for NLP research. For example, HCI people talk about the participatory design, human-centered design, humanity-centered design. A lot of those design principles actually could give us guiding principles in terms of how to do our research better. For example, if we are going to develop a technology going to be used by, let's say, Black English users, we want to also get native speakers involved in this process to sort of brainstorm what would be some greater ways to collect data, what concerns they have in this process, how could we mitigate the potential issues even before we do this type of research, what would be some aspects they prefer, etc. So I think keeping the domain users from the background or from the user group we want to study into the process is actually something we can leverage HCI design thinking. And then this kind of design together with the community, design together with our target users, I think it's very valuable for us to reflect on a lot of the research we are doing in NLP.
Yeah, following on what Diyi said about human-centered design, yeah, I would say that for a typical HCI project, there's usually these 3 stages. The first stage is like need finding, which we also call as a formative study. And we would talk with target users. For example, if I'm trying to develop a tool to support teachers, I will like engage teachers in a formative study to understand their needs and challenges of doing a task. And the second step is system development or technique development to develop a solution. It could be a prototype to try to solve that the need and the challenge that we observed in the first stage. And then we would evaluate again with real stakeholders to see whether the solution actually addressed the problem. And in terms of NLP, I would highlight one challenge in the need finding stage, which I observed is oftentimes if your target users do not understand AI or do not understand NLP, it's hard for them to know what sort of NLP support they want in their process. So I think there needs to. I think there's this also goes back to our previous question. What are some what are some directions here? I think one direction would also be methodology wise. How can we better elicit people's needs around NLP so that we know what kind of support we can provide for them?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. They covered everything. I will just give a jargon. So for the population thing, like there's like people have described that most of the studies, either like building NLP models or like do social science studies, most of the population we try to include is weird being a short term for like white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And if you just take the acronym or like antonym of any of those 5 terms, you kind of get something that's not really included. So I think that's maybe the first way of trying to think what is the background in population that hasn't really been included. But yeah, like for general purpose, the weird, non-weird thing is maybe important. For more like application specific, use case specific things, definitely your user group is the background and population you should be trying to prioritize.
Great, yeah. I think also another good example is the RLHF thing, right? That I think Diyi, you also mentioned in the beginning. So when you are bringing, which is sort of popular in some sense again, maybe with a new term, but like reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? I mean, that should be a very, very sort of concrete and eye-opening example of when you're updating your models to imitate humans like values and decisions, that feedback really needs to be sort of ideally representing all social, economic, cultural backgrounds, right? Otherwise, you are basically giving feedback from a very, very specific sub-community. And so your models will only be able to work well, right, with those communities and be very useless for the remaining populations not included in the feedback. So yeah, and this has been true even for whenever you're collecting data. There have been some very exciting studies, right, showing how even when collecting data on Amazon Mechanical Turk, there can be a lot of effects based on the populations you're working with. Okay, so we have only 3 minutes. Maybe I'll take the last question, and then I think we'll probably have time only for one of you to answer it, but we can see. So the last question on Slido is, since AI interaction with humans can have concerns like ChatGPT misuse, what are your thoughts on the social misuses and issues of these models in the real world? I think that's probably like a whole session in itself, but someone can feel free to take a stab at it.
Okay, I mean, I mentioned the chain of thought, biases and harms in my talk. So I think this is a real concern, that if we are going to release this type of large language models and they are going to transform every dimension of our life, we really need a deep understanding of potential misuse, et cetera, and that can be reflected in many dimensions. First is that in the model construction process, we see a lot of red teaming kind of self-critique, self-diagnose type of paradigm popping up these days. That's one way to sort of, I guess, understand and also model this type of potential misuse and mitigate them in the training process. On the other side, we also see a lot of increasing privacy and security and other type of concerns released by this type of misuse. For them, even it's just a plain query of user asking for signals to contact ChatGPT, it might give you the phone number of another users. As a result, the other user may receive 7,000 calls next morning from internet. So I think there are real issues, real concerns that could be posed by this kind of misuse. That's why, in addition to kind of this training stage mitigation, how to evaluate that more comprehensively, how to sort of go beyond our traditional way of, okay, here is a fixed data set, let's see how it works, versus something that can be more interactive, more simulative, that can sort of foresee those type of risk and take actions is very important. So I think that this is definitely a important topic. We need also HCI sort of understanding to see what would be such use cases, and then also NLP efforts in terms of model mitigation and evaluation to fully understand that.
Yeah, just add a quick note. I think another misuse that I saw was like, I've seen people using the generative AI to basically modify history. Like you can basically tell some image generative model or like also text generation or multimodality generation to say, in 2010, 2 countries was at war, and then it will generate very realistically looking pictures. And if you're not familiar with that, that kind of just, you can basically change, tweak the history however you want. So it's always like when things in this are in the wild, what I have seen is basically people trying to push back and say, oh, this is actually not the right source. You shouldn't believe this. This is the actual history and cite the correct kind of source. So like, I feel like crowdsourced fact checking and also just crowdsourced model auditing is something we have to use. Like researchers, we have good intentions. A lot of people don't have good intentions, and it's really hard for us to keep fighting all of the wrong intentions on our own. And but the crowd, some of them are much better, and maybe in those cases, it's like using those information is good.
Yeah, I think even in the past, right? I mean, ChatGPT is obviously one latest example, but there have been many past instances in the last decade and even before that, right? When these chatbots were released sort of publicly, and then we saw how they were completely corrupted, right? I mean, very quickly. So obviously this is another small example of history corruption, which there has to be sort of guardrails against. But in some sense, that's where also attribution and evidence providing, right, becomes really important. Like if like the chatbot needs to have some sort of trusted sources that it can point to, and that's where a lot of work on faithfulness and factuality are still very relevant, right? Which are obviously dated much before ChatGPT and any such model. So that's also good for students, right? I mean, a lot of you working on things that mattered before still matter a lot and probably matter even more now, right? Because the stakes are higher. So that's good news. Okay, great. So in interest of time, I know all of our mentors and all of you others on the Zoom call have other meetings to go to. So let's end almost on time. Let's thank all our mentors strongly again for taking out time and for the great session. And please feel free to send us any offline feedback or questions on Slack, and also email these mentors if you had any other remaining questions. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much.